Alright, so for shaping these legs, I'm going to use this 1/4 inch sheet of MDF and make a template. Now this is nice because I can get my actual measurements drawn out here and give me a real good idea of how this thing is going to look. Using this template routing method, I have physical dimensions of the height. So I will use that to get rough dimensions so I can start batching out the material for the legs.
Some of the old songs. For old time's sake.
I'm going to start with cutting down this piece of 5/4 walnut to rough dimension for the leg glue ups.
As time goes by.
After cutting my pieces to length, I take them over to the table saw and start cutting them down to their rough width, and then over to the joiner to flatten one side.
Some of the old songs.
After running all 8 pieces through the joiner on one side, I go ahead and lay them all out, making sure that I have 4 legs, and get ready for glue
For
up.
old time's sake.
For this glue up, I'm going to take advantage of Type-On 3's longer open time and make sure I got nice thick coats. And honestly, this is probably a little too much glue, as you'll see during the clamp up here. With all my legs in the clamps, I can set those off to the side to start drying and start preparing my top. And I'm just going to grab my trusty circular saw here to break these down to a rough length, and then move over to the track saw to get one clean straight edge. After cutting a clean straight edge on both of my top pieces, I'm going to go ahead and glue them up. I've since learned that large glue ups like this are probably not a good idea as far as wood movement and expansion, but live and you learn. I could probably benefit from more clamps for this size of a glue up, but as you can see, I'm getting good even clamping pressure. I just don't have that many at this point, so work with what you got. Alright, so with my top glued up, I can go ahead and pull my leg blanks back out of the clamps, and I will start using my template that I cut out, and unfortunately didn't get any footage of this, but I will use this template to get a rough idea of how much of this waste to clear out. So using a jigsaw, I'm just going to cut about an 1/8 inch away from my layout line there. To attach my templates to my cutouts, I'm going to use some CA glue and blue tape. Alright, so to route this template, I'm going to use a 2-inch bottom and top bearing flush trim bit from CMT Tools. And as you can see, I'm not really trying to go, full bore on this. I'm taking my time, I'm making multiple passes. This leg stock is about 1 5/8 inches at this point, and that's a lot of material to hog out on one pass. So taking my time, going nice and easy, I got pretty good results. What I really like about this CA glue method for these templates is it holds it tight enough to hold your template in place, but it's just as easy as, you know, shoving a putty knife in there and popping the tape off, and you got a pretty good looking leg when you're done. Alright, now that I have my legs all shaped, I'm going to head back over to my lumber rack and grab a couple more pieces of walnut so I can start preparing my aprons. I'll do that by starting over at the chop saw, cut them down to a rough length, and basically just repeat the process I did with the legs. Now moving over to the table saw, I'm also going to be cutting these to a rough width. That way I can glue them together and then put them over on the joiner to square up one side before cutting them to final width. Now that I have everything cut down to a rough width, I'm going to mark out for some rough lengths, and there are some bad spots in these boards that I have to try to dodge, so you'll see I just cut around those. And now we're back to the clamps for glue up number 3 of this project. I bought one of these little silicone rollers and trays, and it just, I don't know, maybe I wasn't doing it right or something, but I just couldn't get enough on there at one time, so I just reverted back to just juicing out a bunch and then just using the roller to spread it. And after they came out of the clamps and the glue was nice and dry, I took each of the blanks over to my joiner to face join one side. Alright, after one good side is face joined, I'm going to take it back over to the chop saw and square up one end. And apparently, amidst all the excitement, I completely forgot to glue up pieces for the end aprons. So here I am cutting up some stock so I can get that prepared. Okay, so with all my table components together at this point, I'm going to pull out my flip top orbital sander and planer stand. I built this about 1.5 years ago. Works really great. I have a small shop, and this is a great way to save space on a couple of tools that take up a decent sized benchtop footprint. So at this point I decided to go ahead and start milling down my apron blanks and all my leg blanks. Doing this all at the same time ensures that they are going to be the same dimension because they will be glued end to end. Now that I've got them down to the same thickness, I'll take them back over to the table saw to cut the width. Now I did cut these a little heavy on the table saw so that I could run them back through the planer to get them down to their final width. Alright, moving on to joinery. I'm going to be using dowels to attach the legs to the aprons for this table. Now after marking out all of my places where my dowels will be, I'm going to grab this little Rockler 3/8 doweling jig. It's not the best jig in the world, but it gets the job done. Now this wasn't originally part of the design, but after looking at the legs and the stretchers together, I decided I wanted to go ahead and curve the outside of this leg to match the interior radius. And the benchtop oscillating belt sander makes short work of that. Alright, so now it's time to go ahead and start gluing up all of our dowel joinery. Those little glue holes are a little hard to get the glue spread around in, so what I generally do is just use some of those cheap chip brushes and just trim down to just enough bristles left that kind of fit in those holes a little bit better and give you a little bit better coverage. Alright, so clamping up an angle like this can be a little tricky, but I just took some scrap 2x4s and cut them to the complementary angle of the actual legs themselves. You glue those onto the end, and as long as it's a softer wood than the wood that you're gluing to, after the glue is dry, they'll just pop right off with a putty knife. Alright, so I had a little void in the bottom of one of these boards, so I like to use this Polymer Tech 2-part epoxy. Just mixes up with a putty knife, goes on really well. Just making sure to work that in all directions. And I tend to lay it on a little thick because then I can use a card scraper to scrape it down and then get the remainder off with a sander. Alright, so with my top completely prepped, I'm going to go ahead and get out the track saw and cut everything down to its final dimension. Alright, at this point, now that my tabletop is down to its final dimensions, I'm just going to go ahead and use some 180 grit sandpaper on the orbital sander and just start to smooth everything out. For edge treatments on this table, I decided to go with a 45-degree chamfer bit. Now I did want a pretty heavy chamfer, so I took multiple passes, dropping the bit a little bit more down each pass. I like this chamfered look to give it that mid-century kind of style edge that basically just makes the edges of the table look a little thinner than they are. And with my top prepped and ready to be installed, I can set that aside and start working on the joinery to hook the two leg sets together. For this I'm using dowel joinery again, and I ended up making a couple support stretchers across the top. Alright, with all my stretchers and support pieces done, it's time to go ahead and glue these up. I'm using Titebond Dark. I like the Titebond Dark with walnut. It dries a little bit darker. It's got a little bit longer open time. Just had really good results with it, and I really like using it. So after connecting all my pieces here, after looking at it, I wonder if I put the stretchers a little too low. I really liked it when I did the mock-up, but now that it's been built and sitting in my living room for a while, I'm not sure how I feel about it, so let me know in the comments if you think those stretchers are too low or maybe what you would have done instead.
Some of the old songs.
With my table base glued up and in the clamps, I can set that to the side and start finishing the top. The finish I chose for this project is just a tung oil finish. I dilute it 50-50 with mineral spirits, put it on with a Scotch-Brite pad and really flood the surface. Let it set for 5-10 minutes and then just wipe it all off with a microfiber cloth.
Been a long time.
After wiping everything down until my rag is basically clean, I let it set for about 15 minutes and let any seeping that was going to happen, and then use a regular paper towel to wipe off the excess. While the top is drying and in between its first and second coat, I'm going to go ahead and start finish sanding my base structure. After the finish sanding is complete at 220, I'm just going to take some mineral spirits and wipe everything down. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and use a Forstner bit to drill out a little hole for my figure 8 fasteners that I'll be using to attach the top to the base.
Been a long time.
With all my holes drilled for my fasteners, it's time to put some finish on the base. Again, I'm using tung oil finish for this. A little messy in a vertical application, but if you just stay on top of it with rags, it's not too bad. After letting the top and base finish sit overnight, I'm going to come back and start installing all of my fasteners and hook this baby together. I really like using these figure 8 fasteners. They have elongated holes for the screws so that you can account for any kind of wood movement throughout the seasons that this table might experience. And with that, the coffee table is complete. This is the first coffee table I've built, and I gotta say I'm pretty happy with the results. So if you made it this far into the video, I want to sincerely thank you for watching. If you're not already subscribed and like what you see, go ahead and do that, and we'll see you on the next one.